Hi everybody, it's Sarah Cray with Let's Make Art, and today we are going to talk about paint consistency. And what I mean by that is the paint and water ratio when it comes to watercolor and how you can master it, okay?
Sounds great.
Okay, so this method was invented by a watercolor artist who actually is an artist still today. He makes fantastic work. His name is Zbukvic, and you can look up his artwork. I mean, it's stunning. He's award-winning, all this kind of stuff. And he came up with this method of being able to describe the paint consistency of watercolor while you're painting, okay?
That's really cool.
Yeah, okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to take our watercolor paper and we are going to draw 5 squares on it. Or you don't have to draw squares, but sometimes it's nice to just lay it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to do our paint lightest to darkest over here. And what this range really is transparency to opacity. Is that how I spell opacity?
That's close enough. Yeah, it looks good.
Did I really spell it wrong?
No, I think it's good. I mean,
Okay.
I'll look it up. You keep going.
Okay, great. So the reason why this is super important in watercolor is this is related to values and lightness and darkness of a color. Now, whenever you're building a painting in watercolor and you want it to have form and depth and all of those things, you need to have a range of values within your painting. However, in other mediums like oil or acrylic, if you need a lighter value, you'll mix white. With watercolor, what you do is you actually mix more water into your paint. That allows the paint to be more transparent, which allows the white of the paper to show through more, thus creating a lighter value within your painting. Okay?
I'm going to interrupt this important broadcast to say you've spelled both things correctly on that page.
Thank you. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to label these different things. So the first one is going to be tea. The second one is going to be coffee. The third one is going to be milk. The fourth one is going to be cream. And the fifth one is going to be butter. Now, you might have seen this before with other watercolorists, and I will say that the first time I saw this, it did not make sense in my head for a very silly reason. And Michael, at the end, will you remind me and I'll tell you why?
Okay.
Okay. Okay, now I just want to call out that this method to get this full range really only works with fresh out of the tube watercolor paint. Okay?
Okay.
So what we're going to do is we're going to first try for tea. Now, tea is going to be mostly water. So I have my fresh paint right here out of the tube. I'm bringing water over and I'm just grabbing a little bit and I'm mixing that in. Okay? And I just want you to look on my palette. See how that is freely flowing? Like cannot control if I dip my palette, it's going to move everywhere. That is tea. So very transparent, okay? A barely there color. And then to get coffee, just a little bit more. Now this one is still pretty flowy. Maybe not as flowy as tea, okay? So I'm going to take my coffee there. And usually with tea or coffee, when you put it up, it will like bead, like gravity would pull it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think I can go a little bit, maybe just a slight little bit darker with my coffee. Okay.
Take my coffee black. You know what I mean? Make it a little darker.
Yeah. Then we're going to add a little bit more paint, and this is going to be our milk. Now, at this point, when we're doing milk, it's going to be more even, like even water to paint ratio. And this one, so I'm working over here now, not over here. If I move my palette, this isn't moving. Do you see that?
Oh, yeah.
It's staying still. This is milk. Okay.
Okay.
And our next one is cream. Now, cream, I'm going to move it like this.
If your milk looks like that, don't drink it.
Okay, now for cream, what we're going for is even more, like this is going to be very, very thick. Okay, so it still moves. The paint will still move in my palette, and it will still go onto my paper. But look at the transparency difference.
Oh, yeah.
Do you see that? Now, butter is basically paint straight out of the tube, like no water. So that's me just taking my paint. And this one, it's not going to move. See how it's not moving it's not moving at all in my palette, right? Because it's straight out. And then this one, when I go to put it to my paper, it's pretty dry. Like there's so much paint on here and so little water that it's very skippy.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. It has textures of the paper, kind of.
So when you are going to do different layers or values within your painting, for the most part, we usually work from this range. We usually start here with our initial layers, and then as we layer, we build up. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And very rarely am I using butter. I use butter, like that's your bleed proof white highlights. That is maybe like your grass or something like that, like just very little amount of details, maybe for texture. We might use it in atmospheric painting, but for the most part, this is not totally what we use all of the time. However, you want to make sure that when you are doing a painting, you have this full range. With beginner watercolors especially, they'll either do one or two things. They'll only stay here or they'll only stay here.
Mm.
These people usually have experience with like acrylic or oil because they're used to working with thick paint. And then people are going here because they just aren't quite sure how to load up their brush to get this full range of value. And if you're looking at this, you'll see these are my light values. These are my medium values. And these are my dark values. Okay.
It's such an interesting chart because you said that, usually start from tea and go to butter. When cooking, it's the opposite. It's just butter all the time, but I'm rarely drinking tea while I'm cooking. But yeah.
Okay, so what I want to show that was funny.
Thank you.
And what I want to show you is basically how these values or how these different paint consistencies look on paper while you're painting. I mean, I did a little swatch here, but when you're painting in watercolor, you're usually going to be painting on 3 different types of surfaces: a dry, damp, or wet surface. Okay, so I'm going to take this off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get clean water. This I'm going to leave dry. I'm going to do a swoop here for damp. And then I'm going to do wet right here. And how you can tell the difference between wet and damp area while you're painting is the shininess of the paper. If the paper is super, super shiny, then it's really, really wet. If it has a little bit of a sheen, I don't know if you can see it on the side. If it has a little bit of a sheen, then that's how it's damp, okay? So we have dry, damp, wet. So I'm going to start with wet, and we're going to do the same thing. I got to make sure my brush is clean of that butter paint.
What color are you using up here? What is that?
This is indigo.
It's lovely.
So this is where, again, in my palette, it is freely flowing. It moves a lot. It's mostly water, okay?
Okay.
So there's tea. And as you can see, it's going to diffuse out a lot. Now I'm going to grab milk. Milk is the even ratio. Okay. And then I'm going to go straight from the tube. We're going to do some butter, because if you remember here, when you do butter on this or cream on this, it's not going to move a lot. But if you do it on a wet surface, it does. Look at how gorgeous that is. Okay. So that are 3 of those different paint consistencies on a wet surface. Now we're going to do damp. Rinse my brush. I have a clean brush. I'm grabbing some tea. Then I'm going to grab some milk. And now I'm going to grab some cream. And this is what's super interesting about watercolor too, because a lot of about watercolor is patience. When you first put this brushstroke down on your paper, it's going to do something, but it's not complete yet. It's going to keep moving. It's going to keep reacting. It's going to keep doing something different. So the biggest thing is after you paint, you kind of want to see what happens. You want to respond to what's happening, and we don't want to assume what's going to happen, because depending on the paint consistency that you're using and also how wet or dry your paper is, that is going to have a huge effect on what the watercolor does, okay? Now we have one more. So this is dry over here. This is our tea. This is our milk. And here we have our
Butter.
cream or our butter. I mean, this is probably more cream.
Gotcha.
Okay. So just looking at this, you can see that these different paint consistencies react differently on the paper. And the more comfortable you feel understanding, well, how do I get tea? How do I get coffee? How do I get milk and cream? That is going to help you have full control over your watercolor painting and give you way more confidence while you are painting, okay? Now, it takes a long time to practice this and really feel comfortable being able to grab that, initially. So if I'm, teaching you guys a tutorial and I say, okay, the paint consistency I'm using for this is going to be a bit more like tea or milk or cream, then you kind of have a better understanding of how much paint you should have on your brush compared to water, okay? And don't be afraid to use like a big mixing palette like this or something, because how the paint reacts on the palette is going to give you information on its consistency. Over here we have milk and, over here we have cream and butter, and it's not moving. See how it's not moving?
Mm-hmm.
Here we have more tea and coffee, and that is moving pretty freely on my palette, okay? And the reason, again, why this is important to understand is this is how we, for the most part, master our values within watercolor. A lot of the time, we really don't get to the cream when it comes to layering our paint and our paint consistency, but having that full range of light to dark value is what that's gonna give your painting depth, three-dimensionality, and form, which is really what we're going for when we're doing like landscapes, animals, florals, anything like that. Okay. Now, I do want to acknowledge a couple things really quick. One, this, again, really that full range only works when you're using paint fresh out of the tube. Personally, as a watercolorist, I don't love to use paint right out of the tube unless I purposely am trying to create butter. And the reason for that is because when your watercolor paint is fresh on your palette, you use a lot of it. And so I like to be a little bit more sparing with my paint use and really let it go a full way. If you're using liquid watercolors, the most you're going to get to is probably here and maybe here, okay? It's going to be difficult for you to get that creamy thickness because the liquid watercolors are already in liquid form. And at this point, a lot of it is just like how thick that paint is coming up. Now, for those who are using pan paints, it's going to be hard to get that butter because that's basically paint fresh out of the tube. And with pan paints, they're like dried within that on your palette already. And there's nothing wrong. Like, again, the butter you don't use as often, or I don't. It's really just finishing details. So this is kind of the range that we're going for our values. Okay?
All right.
Now, do you want to hear why it didn't make sense to me? Michael,
I was going to remind you. I was just about
to.
Do
you have a guess of why when I first heard that, I was just like, no, that doesn't make any
sense?
sense.
I had to guess it's because you thought of melted butter. And melted butter is kind of clear, That's
a good guess.
Okay.
Okay, it's actually because I put so much milk in my coffee that when I thought about coffee, I thought about how
very opaque coffee.
How opaque it is because I put so much milk and sugar and whipped cream in my coffee that I'm like, there is not a difference in opacity between coffee and milk. That's user error. So anyways, this is a great way for you guys to practice your paint consistency, and being able to control your paint consistency is going to be directly related to being able to control your values. And if you can master controlling your values, then you can paint watercolor. Okay? I mean, you can paint watercolor anyway. I'm just saying it makes it easier. And then the other thing I want you guys to remember is pay attention to what the surface is like on your watercolor painting. Notice how these different paint consistencies react differently depending on if your paper is wet, damp, or dry. Okay?
Sounds
So
great.
that is a great practice for you guys to get going with your watercolor. If you can master this, you can do a lot of fantastic paintings. And remember, it just takes practice. You can absolutely do this. I know you can. Thank you so much for painting with me. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.